They always say the power of the British Empire came from ships, soldiers, and swords. But behind it all, there was something much more subtle, much more powerful. Something happening behind marble buildings, on dark wooden desks. Finance. The story I'm going to tell today is the story of how Britain conquered the world with debt. Yes, you heard that right. With debt. Let's go back to the 17th century. At that time, England wasn't a major power like today. In fact, compared to its rivals, it was considered weak. Spain and Portugal had massive colonies. France was rising. The Dutch were exploding in trade. And England? England had no money. Constant war, constant debt, constant bankruptcy. Nobody wanted to lend money to the English king. But then, in 1694, something happened. And the whole game changed. The Bank of England, the Central Bank of England, was founded. It may sound ordinary today, but this was one of those moments that changed history. Because for the first time, England could borrow money in a reliable way. The king's insecure, "I promise I'll pay" notes suddenly turned into something called bonds. Solid investments that could be bought and sold. Government debt was now managed professionally, and with this, England gained a debt machine to finance its wars. Its rivals were going bankrupt. England, meanwhile, borrowed more and borrowed again, but never collapsed. Why? Because investors now trusted England, and when trust increased, interest rates fell. When interest rates fell, England could borrow even more, and with that borrowed money, larger armies and larger navies were built. War was no longer won with just weapons, it was won in the bond market. For example, in the War of Spanish Succession, England was able to fight for years solely thanks to this debt system. In the 7 Years' War, borrowing reached insane levels, but England didn't go bankrupt. On the contrary, it grew. France collapsed, England expanded. Because the financial system made the difference. During this period, there was also the famous East India Company. Technically a company, yet also like a state, like an army, collecting taxes in India, maintaining private armies, pumping money back to Britain. And where did that money go? Into London's financial circles. Bankers profited, bondholders profited, and the system grew and grew. Debt, war, conquest, trade, tax, repayment of debt, more debt. Imagine a cycle like that. This cycle was the engine of the British Empire. By the 19th century, this engine was running at full power. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain borrowed the modern equivalent of hundreds of billions. Interest payments consumed half the budget, yet investors kept lending, saying they'll pay it back anyway. Because Britain's trade, colonies, and industry kept growing. Then the game shifted again. Finance became the center of internal power as well. The public paid the burden of debt with taxes on tea, sugar, and tobacco, while bankers grew richer and richer through steady interest income. Then came China, the Opium Wars. Britain's dependence on Chinese tea and silk created a massive trade deficit. So what did they do? They pushed opium, produced in India, into China. The flow of silver reversed. When China resisted, Britain declared war. The result? Ports opened, trade expanded, and profits once again flowed into London. By the mid-century, London had become the financial capital of the world. Railways in Argentina, mines in Africa, plantations in the Caribbean. But the capital always came from Britain. And when countries couldn't pay their debts, British warships showed up at their door. Finance was no different from a weapon. Then came gold. When the pound was tied to gold, the entire world said, "This currency is solid," and rushed into Britain. Borrowing became cheaper. Britain borrowed and lent at the same time. In short, it set the rules, and the world followed. Of course, this system had winners and losers. While people in India starved, bondholders in London added to their wealth. Because the financial system was built on efficiency, but sometimes that efficiency cost millions of lives. And now we arrive at the world we live in today. Government bonds, public debt, central bank policies, even how modern crises are handled. All of it is a continuation of the foundations built during that time. Today, governments borrow trillions. Wars are funded not by taxes but by debt. Crises erupt, bubbles burst, ordinary people suffer. But bondholders almost never lose. So has the system changed? No, it has only changed hands. The most important lesson is this. If you don't understand finance, you get buried under history. If you can't grasp the relationship between money and power, you get crushed by the same mechanism. History may not repeat in the same form, but it always crushes those who fail to understand. If you enjoyed this perspective, don't forget to subscribe. I explore history and economics, and history always has an answer. I'll show you where to look.